folks welcome. I know John's about ready to get logged on here and let folks, as folks want, come on in. Let me just say a few words about yesterday and about where we are today. So first, thanks again to my team, Andrew Robinson, Christian Gross, Martin Chickelin, of course, Masia. I thought that yesterday went really well, and I was really impressed and super excited about what I saw and what I was able to participate in, connecting along those lines. Today, we've got another excellent lineup. John and I will be dialoguing about recursive relevance realization in relation. Let me just check something. And then we have two excellent presentations emerging in terms of justifying social justice, whereby folks are going to take sort of a UTOK perspective on this incredibly important topic. And Michael Mascolo, Brad Kirshner, Steve Quackenbush are going to be offering really powerful reflections on there. I wish I could attend that session, but unfortunately, I'm going to be, or fortunately, I'm also, there's UTIC, Fundamental Identity Shift, and TSK, Time-Space Knowledge. And that's really going to be exploring the processes by which individuals are reflecting on themselves, analyzing their subjectivity, achieve mindfulness in relation, and then move from there into what UTOK offers. So I'm super excited for that. Then what we have at lunch, we actually have some lunch sessions. Certainly folks like last time can just veg a little bit and be good. But if you want to hang, we have a couple of sessions. Sushri, I'm not sure his last name, is the gist of language. Ingrid is going to be talking, available to talk about the anagram and wisdom psychotechnologies. And then you have us, some of us from the UTOK team are going to be hanging out for a UTOK chat. So that would be cool. And then following that, we have a few other presentations coming up. We have one on Bildung and Enlightenment 2.0. Be super exciting. And then we also have Alexander Bard returning, talking about, and his crew talking about sex, archetypes, and gender paradigmatics. And then I see Andre Marquis in the audience here. I'll be connecting with him and others to talk about the Common Core. And then we'll wrap it up with a conversation about science, wisdom, and God. Hey, all right, great. So that's, and then, but not only do we have a number of excellent presentations from the folks speaking English, I'm going to hand it over to Masia, who's also going to share some thoughts about the Brazilian element and set us up and hand the ball back to me and John, talk about recursive relevance realization in relation. Masia?
Okay, so having trouble unmuting for a second. Well, it's lovely to be here. It's lovely to introduce this opening session for the second day. Like Gregg said, yesterday was amazing and really rewarding. I think I can speak on behalf of the UTOK team that when we work on the backstage to put this up and we actually see people enjoying the event and engaging, that's very, very rewarding. And we feel like it's worthwhile, all the work and all the especially, you know, Andrew has been doing such amazing work behind the scenes, and Christian as well, Martin. So thank them again for all that. And yesterday was a success. Looking forward to today. We're going to have 2 more sessions in Portuguese. I can say that the yesterday sessions from the Brazilian audience were also super engaging. And I think we planted a seed there for future conversations and, you know, a sense of community building with those folks. So that was very worthwhile. Now, for this session, again, it's great to introduce what I think is a very promising exchange between Gregg and John again. And John, it's a pleasure to meet you directly. I know you're a great friend of UTOK, and so many of your ideas really jive well with the system. And, you know, I think today is going to be, before anything, a conversation between 2 friends. And inherently, that's going to have a personal relational touch to it, right? And so I wanted to offer a little bit of my personal relational aspect in relationship to both of their ideas. Because an interesting thing for me is that as I was learning UTOK, and as I was getting to know Gregg, we're getting closer, I was learning the UTOK system, and it was becoming this guiding worldview for me, not only propositionally, but as the set of practices that we began to cultivate in our personal lives. I was also learning about John's work. And I think learning about those in parallel, that came with a lot of affordances because I could begin to see their inner relations. For example, as I was learning concepts like mental behavior and how mental behavior mindedness in general is this missing link in so many of our systems of understanding, modern and postmodern. I was seeing how the recursive relevance realization, that's this dynamic process happening underlying this mental behavior, was there. And so I was making sense of those ideas in relation to one another the whole time. And that just made a lot of coherent sense to me as I was learning about both of their works. And so, I think as part of our experience, one thing that UTOK really homes in is how we experience the world both as primates and persons. And it began to make a lot of sense to me that both as justifying persons, as investing and influencing primates, this recursive relevance realization process was also in place. And these self-authored relations are so core to our experience as primates, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the conversation cultivates here today, that this triple R process will be also underlying our processes of influence, when influencing on another, getting influenced by others, and tracking our felt sense of being seen, known, and valued. So thank you, Gregg, for putting this conversation together. I'm really looking forward to it. I can also predict that others are as well. So
great.
I'll give it back to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, John, for joining us. What we're going to be dialoguing today about is in particular going to exploring the connection between recursive relevance realization, the influence matrix, and where we are in our current thinking. So one of the things I thought I would do very quickly, just to make sure people are on the same page, share 2 slides very briefly just on the influence matrix. Then, John, maybe you can just say a word or two about recursive relevance realization, and then you and I can start to expand on where we are in relationship to these concepts. As we encountered them when we did the Untangling the World Knot in particular, they yoked together, I think, in a very, very powerful way. But just for folks who, in case you're not familiar with it, let me share really quickly what the basic structure of the influence matrix is, so you can get a sense of what we're talking about here. So the influence matrix is the 4th idea on the tree of life. And what it does is it maps the human relationship system, the primate relationship system. It merges lots of different ideas together, but 2 central ideas come from Timothy Leary and what's called the circumplex model, which says that people track people basically on a vertical dimension, can be framed as dominance and submission, and a horizontal dimension of warmth and coolness, or affiliation and hostility. It also then blends to John Bowlby's work, an attachment, which emphasizes the idea that you feel protected and secure on the one hand, or rejected and vulnerable on the other. This is going to become what's called the black line. And then there's an autonomy dependency dimension. What the matrix says is that we have fused, we humans have blended the process dimensions of relating to others into a guidance system that then is mapped according to 4 different dimensions that we're intuitively tracking as we're relating to people at the level of process. So we get together, we got to go to the movies, we have to do chores together, we got to do our homework together. There's the content of what we're doing, and then it's the self-other how we are doing, so how we're tracking ourselves in relationship to other. The matrix says there's a core dimension that we're tracking in terms of our barometer of relational value and social influence, the RVSI line, and a felt sense of high relational value and social influence versus low. Relational value refers to the extent to which we feel seen, known, and valued by important others. Social influence is the instrumental aspect of it, to the extent to which we feel like we have resources that can move others in accordance with our interests. Those things are closely related, but they're also separate. And then there are 3 process dimensions. The vertical dimension that comes from the Leary work and others, basically where you are on a rank And again, we can put that in dominance submission terms. There's other terms you could use. Then the horizontal. So that's from the Leary work in terms of then connecting to people affiliative wise, or separating interest and potentially hostilely navigating that. And then finally, there's a distancing or connecting element called autonomy dependency, called the freedom line. So power, love, and freedom, the blue, the red, and the green are process dimensions that we're tracking. And by the way, our emotional system, affective valence system, is getting energized motion depending on how things shift. And then we can be oriented towards self over other strategies versus other over self strategies. So that's the basic backdrop of the influence matrix. Notice it's a motivational and emotional system framework. So it's a framework for what's guiding and our approach avoidance structures in an evolutionary kind of way, in the sense that these would be important variables that we would be tracking across all sorts of different kinds of situations that would be relevant for things like survival, reproductive success, mediated through the social connections we have, and then the energized motion of emotion to track changes that have valence. The beauty of that, and I emphasize that, is because I'm going to now hand it over to John. And while John has an enormous amount to say about motivation and emotion, the ground of recursive relevance is in the perceptual cognitive, if you want to use those terms. And the marriage then between a perceptual cognitive frame and a motivational emotional frame is one of the things that I find to be particularly powerful. So let me turn it over to John, talk about the 3 R's, and then we'll build the bridges to create the 4th R, as it were.
So first of all, thanks to Masia, and thanks to you, Gregg. It's a pleasure to meet you finally, Masia. So it's always been indirect, and you are as beautiful as Gregg said you are. So it's wonderful to be here. I'm very appreciative of this. And Masia is right. This goes beyond, I think, pretty significant scientific collaboration. Gregg and I are friends, and an important friendship. And I'm here not only to present the work, but to support what Gregg is doing, because I think he's an important voice. And I've done a lot, and I'm not trying to ask for any kind of credit or anything. I've done a lot to try and lift Gregg into the limelight, because I think his work needs to be known more. And I'm very glad about this conference. And I'm very glad that it is shining the spotlight specifically on his work. So I welcome the privilege of participating in that. I'm going to talk very briefly about a couple of theoretical moves, innovations that have happened within relevance realization, and then show how this plugs in very well to the influence matrix, as Gregg just so succinctly and elegantly pointed out. So what's happened most recently is the realization of 2 meta problems. Your general intelligence is the ability to solve meta problems. Meta problems are any problems you're trying to solve when you're solving specific problems to reach specific goals. Of course, the one you've probably heard about that I've been talking about forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, because I'm horribly obsessed by it, is relevance realization. But there has been recently in both a published paper and 2 conference presentations an integration of relevance realization with another meta problem. The other meta problem, and this is also Michael Levin's work, is the idea of the cognitive light cone. How much can you anticipate your environment? So ceteris paribus, the more you can anticipate your environment, the more intelligent you are, the more adaptive you are. The thing about this is the adaptation and the relevance, the anticipation and the relevance realization are interlocking. The more I anticipate, the more geometrically, exponentially, the need for relevance realization goes up. Relevance realization needs some kind of anticipation because it has to have a relationship between an initial state and goal state. So the 2 are actually baked into each other. Now, fortunately, well, at least what I've argued in publication with others and in presentation, is we have an existing emerging theoretical framework for anticipation, and it's called predictive processing. I prefer that name over free energy, Bayesian. I think the Bayesian is a dodge. I don't think these systems are doing Bayesian calculation. I think they're only described that way, et cetera, et cetera. I won't get into the particulars. Some of you know that, but I'm just mentioning why I will refer to it as predictive processing, which is the idea that the brain is trying to afford the meta problem, solve the meta problem of anticipation by reducing the degree to which it is surprised. And it does this, and here's one of the core insights. It does this, and think about how this will map into Gregg's work. It does this and this is the core insight, not by trying to directly predict the world, but by predicting itself, interacting with the world. And it turns out by predicting itself in this massively recursive fashion, it can predict the world and prepare for the world at the same time, because it's not only predicting, it's trying to complete patterns, anticipation. And so that means it can anticipate the world at multiple different temporal spatial scales. Very powerful. Central problem in predictive processing is the one I predicted, which is as you expand that up, you get a combinatorial explosion of the things you have to pay attention to. Relevance realization, there's a mechanism in predictive processing, which is called precision weighting, which is supposed to privilege certain patterns of error that are percolating up the system and predictions that are percolating down. The problem with is how do you set precision weighting? There were some clumsy initial attempts at this. You do what's most reliable. No, there's lots of reliable shit in your environment you don't care about, right? And stuff like that. And then what is sort of baked in, because some of these equations come out in sort of a hacked fashion, they're not theoretically motivated. But what's baked in and what we argued in the paper is the following idea. Predictive processing is trying to reduce error, and it hits unavoidable trade-off problems. I'll give you one that's at the core of signal detection. Which matters to you more, a miss or a mistake? Because as you try to reduce misses, you increase mistakes. And as you try to reduce mistakes, you increase misses. And this is an unavoidable thing. And yet you have to set a criterion and make a decision. This is core signal detection theory. And the idea here is what relevance realization, what predictive processing does is find these irresolvable trade-offs that are only decidable in terms of your online information coming from you directly from the environment you're in, and it creates opponent processing between these. It self-organizes opponent processing. Then the opponent processing is where relevance realization takes over. The core idea of relevance realization is we have multidimensional opponent processing, and what it's ultimately toggling between is efficiency being really tightly fitted to this particular environment, or what's now called, we're now calling evolvability. I don't like some of the degradation and other terms that are used because they're misleading. So basically, do you want a really tight fit that limits you very specifically to this environment? Do you want a loose fit that lets you explore other environments? You're always trading between that, and then you're trading between these various things like missing and mistakes, and depending on whether you want to be tightly fitted to this environment or loosely fitted. And all of that is tracking the degree to which you're reducing surprise. And so you get the two theories. And then the idea is once you get these heuristics, these opponent processing, they're not really heuristics, they're trade-offs between cost functions. But once you get those, they can start doing opponent processing between each other. Like, for example, I mentioned explore and exploit, or generalize versus discriminate. And you get the whole relevance realization machinery. And then if you'll allow me an analogy, the predictive processing is like your genetic machinery. It's constantly trying to replicate your sensory motor loop. But then what happens is it becomes subject to the evolutionary pressures of relevance realization, and these two, just like in the grand synthesis of modern biology, are constraining and affording each other, and you get a very, very sophisticated way of, in an interlocking fashion and in a constantly evolving fashion, solving the two meta problems of anticipation and relevance realization. This gives you the basic machinery and how it nests up. Now, notice what happens. You get the nesting up upwards in opponent processing. And what did Gregg just put up? He put up a schema in which there is all this opponent processing going on. The relevance realization machinery of anticipatory relevance realization fits into that perfectly and says, well, this is the engine that's driving the opponent process that gives the energy and the motivation to the influence matrix. And the two fit together just like that. Then we talked about, in Untangling the World Knot, we talked about recursive relevance realization. And I'm not going to try and do the whole thing on consciousness, but the idea is you get unconscious relevance realization that then enters into a competition process for access to working memory. And then what becomes relevant to working memory is salient to you. It's actually attentionally, perceptually experienced by you. And then when that takes place within what I call perspectival knowing, and I can't go over it, but that's knowing by noticing and taking a perspective, right? When you get salience within perspectival knowing, you have basic sentience, and you get all the adverbial qualities of consciousness. You get a here-ness, a now-ness, a centeredness. And then what Gregg and I added, you also get another adverbial quality, a very basic one, which is valence, approach, avoid, right? And then you're starting to get the rich field of sentience. The fourth R, which we're going to explore, is the idea that I've been doing a lot of work on, and Gregg has too, which is the idea that a lot of our anticipatory relevance realization problem solving is not done individually. It is done through extended mind, which is the collective intelligence of distributed cognition. So we need to build a proper interface relationship between us that will give us, and this is Hegel, a spirit of trust so that we can reciprocally recognize, listen to this language, each other, because I think the Hegelian argument that that's the basis of the normativity that guides rationality and guides collective intelligence becomes possible. And so this reciprocal recognition that builds a spirit of trust that affords the machinery of collective normativity on our collective intelligence and makes something like reflective rationality possible to us, because I internalize other people's perspectives on me to become metacognitive. And so this is the thing that, of course, Gregg is talking about when he's talking about the way we need to be reciprocally recognized as beings that carry the capacity for valuation judgments that are normatively binding on other people. This is the guts of Hegel, and that's what Gregg is talking about, and that's the fourth R that we're going to talk quite a bit about today. So we now have a quadruple R. We might have to change the acronym, but we want to talk about how that recursive relevance realization is brought into relationality in this reciprocal recognition, spirit of trust, cooperative, interpenetrating generation of normativity on collective intelligence that affords us becoming rational, and therefore rational within a sociocultural context means we are also capable of becoming moral beings. And then that feeds into the rationality and morality feed directly into Gregg's proposal for the justification hypothesis. And there you go. And once again,
boom. All right. No, that's beautiful, John. I want to jump in here.
Yeah, please.
And let's bring this down a little bit just to folks. Take a second, go back to some memories that you have. Okay. Take a second, go back to some memories. What are some formative memories that you have? In high school, say, and I'll share mine, and I'll just make a point about this. So I'll give you two memories, and what I'm doing here is I just want to make this very real for us, and then I'll come back to John's comments. Okay, just so that you can have this felt sense in your episodic memory. So when I go back to my memories in high school, and I asked what are good memories and bad memories. There's two archetypal memories I have. So I was not much of an athlete, but I played soccer okay. I was goalie, and my dad was the coach, and it was a second championship, and I made a great save with 5 minutes to go, and we won the game 1-0, and I was a little bit of a hero. And I remember that very vividly. I remember the 20 people in the crowd going crazy for my unbelievable athletic save. Okay. I also remember very clearly going up and asking a girl out in the 10th grade with a little bag and a flower, and I handed it to her, and she took it, and it was between second and third period, and we went to lunch, and she was a cheerleader, and all her cheerleader friends were sitting at the table across from me, and she took out and I noticed that they were pointing at me and laughing at me, and in between them was the little bag I had given her, my little rose and my little invitation to go out, and they were laughing, and they were like, you are not in my class, buddy. We are laughing at your ass. You have misconstrued where you are on the social standard. And I distinctly remember feeling the shrunken injury, right? All my friends hadn't gotten there yet. I'm alone at the table, a little 10th grade guy looking over there and feeling the injury. Okay. So I encourage you to think about what are the important moments in your life, or relational moments. And what you have there, what I'm offering is, high relational value, high social influence. I did something for the group and I was loved by it, right? Or I was rejected. I tried to create a connection and rejected. What are the valence on that? What do you remember about that? And so those are sort of archetypal structures. My argument with the influence matrix is actually we're tracking these elements in our relationships with others all the time. Okay. And then I'll come back to the opponent process, and then John and I will really sync up. So the other thing I want to do is think about your current relationships. Okay. And now your significant relations, and think about how you try to navigate love and control. Okay. Power and love. I think about the last time you had a fight. Okay. Did you feel the tension between apologizing and deferring? I'm sorry, honey. It was my fault. I overshot there. I was insensitive. Or screw you. What are you talking about? You're always nagging me. It's kind of a masculine way of framing that. Okay. What is that? That's a defy, defer, opponent process. It's a tension. Okay. Between your orienting toward the other, feeling the desire for affiliation, connection, dependency, maybe willing to submit, putting their needs above you, versus a dominant, I'm in control. I don't need you. I can distance. That self over other versus other over self is fundamentally important. And so we're navigating that. Now those are the felt experiences. Now, how do we detect that? What are we doing? We're anticipating across recursive relevance to frame what it is that we are seeing and reacting to. Okay. So fundamentally, that's, and I want to bring it here because the other thing I really want to mention, and then I'll go back to John, is that we then want to think about this as a fractal scaling. Okay. And what do I mean by fractal scaling? I want to think about my heart. I just shared with you my little episodic heart, right? If I go back and how do I talk to you about my dad and we carry psychodynamic theory will tell you're carrying your self-other representations and transferring those. So there's that. Then you bring that to your microscopic relationships. Microscopic here, I'm talking in the Bronfenbrenner sense. So if you know Yuri Bronfenbrenner's socioecological model, it scales up. So me and Masia have our particular intersubjective felt space. And sometimes there's the harmony. John was talking about the harmony. When you sync up and right relation and get mutual relational value and mutual social influence, God, you feel the love. And then sometimes you don't, right? Occasionally you don't. And you feel the tension and the break. Okay, in relation. So you can track that. Now we go from my heart to our heart at the microscopic, and then think about it in terms of, how do you get into a family? What's the harmony? And can the family create a felt sense, a shared sense of mutual relational value and social influence, whereby the parts of the family system are coordinating or not? Does a family put the fun in dysfunctional? Okay, as people compete and feel alienated and then break down in relationship to defenses, and all of a sudden the hostile felt sense of I need to protect myself from losing social influence or relational value releases anger and then disharmony. And then we can scale up to the group. Hey, this UTOK community, how are we coming together? How's the Vervaeke Foundation coming together, right? And is the capacity, and then scale from there and there and there. And then ultimately you get the fractal, the hope for extended collective strong transcendence, ultimately on the positive side. There's at the level of relation. So the last thing I'll say is I'll just make a point. This is super important in psychotherapy. Okay. The Common Core, which I'll be talking about with Andre, emphasizes, it's not the only thing, but it emphasizes the way a healer will enter a relationship, create a recursive relevance realization attention, and whether or not that dance results in a mutual felt sense of relational value in the appropriate boundary roles, that's going to be one set of dynamics or not. And I would argue that recursive relevance realization in relation provides us a beautiful framework for tracking whether or not you would have an effective therapeutic dance or not. That's just one example. So I'll hush up. I'll throw that back to John and see that you can, what I'm hoping you're seeing is, wow, these are different but complementary aspectualizations of this particular problem.
That was wonderful. I mean, and I appreciate, I have a proclivity to dwell in abstract Platonic space a little too much. And Gregg grounds things in a very helpful fashion. I mean, there's a whole bunch to say here. Notice the possible connections by integrating these two theories between, fundamental accounts about intelligence, individual and collective, and cognitive agency on one side, and how people enter in to sociality and how that can play out in therapeutic contexts. Also, given the allusions I was making to a possible integration between dynamical systems theory and the Hegelian revival that is removing Hegel from a metaphysical, like otherly worldly realm. Pinkard's book, The Phenomenology of Spirit, the sociality of reason, and dropping it back down into that Geist is the collective intelligence of distributed cognition. And what we're actually talking about is social interface and reciprocal recognition and rituals of forgiveness and trust building and all the stuff that Gregg is talking about. Like, if there's no spirit of trust between the therapist and the client, no therapy happens. That's the rapport factor, the dodo effect. This is the overriding variable that trumps all theoretical differences in technique and orientation, right? And there's a profound reason for it, right? You're getting the interface that affords the interrelation between individual recursive relevance realization, predictive processing, and collective intelligence, where we actually do most of our problem solving. None of us invented English. Who's the boss of English? Who's governing it? It doesn't stay static, it evolves. What guides that evolution? Well, the answer is no one in particular. It's very much the kind of thing that we're talking about here. It's right. You have this collective machinery in which human beings are constantly being driven by the influence matrix. And that means they're constantly modifying their usages of terms in order to maintain that spirit of trust that is presupposed by all communication. Look at Grice, look at Grice, look at Grice, okay? And by that mechanism, the language constantly evolves and then governs our speech. Like, think about this. We're getting close to starting to get an understanding of how all of this can work together and how all these domains that we found so disparate, science and therapy, right? Well, now we're starting to understand the collective intelligence and rationality in science, and using that same framework to understand what's going on in therapy. Think about how powerful that is. Think about how that can help do the project that Gregg has invested so much of his energy and time in, which is overcoming the enlightenment gap. Here's the scientific, here's the therapeutic, and we need to bridge between them. That's been one of Gregg's projects. This integration that we're talking about, theoretical integration, is affording a very plausible, very well argued, I mean, I'm sorry, that's self-promotional, but I think it is rigorously argued answer to that problem. And that's fundamental to me and to Gregg, because above and beyond psychotherapeutics and the understanding of science and of history and of culture and language, bridging that gap allows us to tackle one of the main drivers of the meaning crisis that is afflicting us in an ever accelerating manner. And I want to turn things back over to Gregg now.
Amen. Amen. The breadth of this issue is enormous, and the implications of it are enormous. And it's relevant for the therapy room. I want to bring that. It's relevant for the bedroom. It's relevant for the boardroom. it's relevant for schools. The relevance of this is ubiquitous. There's one other point I want to make at the level of, especially since I see Jim Rutt in the audience, and this issue of game A, game B is going to come up here, at least in relationship to the influence matrix. So I have an old influence matrix cup here. That was actually, my kids got that for me when I generated the first book. But actually what's missing in this old version is the distinction between relational value and social influence. And I just want to make a comment about this because this is actually super relevant. This came actually through my insights in therapy. I noticed that there were several people that I were treating in history would have high social influence. They were well respected, they were honored, but they felt like imposters. Okay, they did not feel like they were known. They didn't feel like they were valued, and they felt deeply interested. So they had social influence instrumentally, but they felt fundamentally cut off from their felt experience of being. And then was like, well, wait a minute, there's a fundamental difference between social influence and relational value. You can actually see this like when if an aging couple, one woman, one of the partners gets demented, and a social influence view, you're back, okay, well, you're done. You're no longer instrumentally valued to me. I'm out of here. From a relational value, I'll devote my life to taking care of you. That's the fundamental, at a behavioral level. What's the difference between social influence and relational value? I'll take care of you as you get demented. Okay. Because I love the essence of you, because I love what you are in this universe, your core essence. Feel that. Okay. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up in relationship to game A, game B in the current situation, what does a market economy do, folks? What does a market economy need to do? It needs to instrumentalize, abstract and instrumentalize our labor influence. Okay. It turns us into social influence machines, and unbelievably effectively. Look at all the stuff. It turns us into social influence. Money is fungible. It just changes. Okay. So that if I can get you to do stuff cheaper in a market economy, that's what I do. If you get demented as a worker, you're done. I'm going to hire somebody else. Okay. So the labor economy is a fundamental social influence. It's important and powerful. But what does it mean? It means that to the extent that you're participating in that, you're doing it for instrumental, not for relational value. Try to pay your spouse to be a better spouse and see how that goes, right? Hey, you were great last night. Here's a little more money. Doesn't work. Why? Because intuitively, it emphasizes the instrumentality as opposed to the relational value. So for me, when I look out at what we are doing society-wise and look at part of the meaning crisis, there are many facets to it. But if you look at the loneliness crisis and the isolation crisis and the felt sense of mental health, I think the failure of our system to create an opportunity for people to be seen, known, and valued is really, really important. So at that level of the kind of society that we would be successful at would be a society which maximizes both social influence and felt sense of relational value. And we have to have societies that afford both of those dimensions. So I wanted to say that in relation to the large scale implications.
I want to pick up on that and say how that plugs back into, we're going to keep doing this, by the way, because this is how we work. It's going to it plugs back into all the work I'm doing on these two running independently, part of the fragmentation problem in psychology, research programs going on in psychology. One is meaning in life and the other is belonging. Kelly Allen is the belonging person driving a lot of that research. And then, of course, there's many people, Hicks and others are doing the work on meaning in life. Martella and Stega are some of the big names. We've got a good sense of what the meaning in life is. Meaning in life is exactly what Gregg described, what keeps you going even when your subjective well-being is going down. Like when your partner's demented, your subjective well-being is crashing. It's collapsing by reliable measures. And of course, wealth and status are going to be negatively affected. Well, why do you hang in? Well, part of why people hang in is meaning in life. It's the same reason why people have children. From the perspective of subjective well-being and of sort of wealth and status, well, at least wealth, having a child is a disaster. But people do it because it enhances meaning in life. So we have this powerful drive that keeps us going when we fail, when we're frustrated, when we feel things are futile. The meaning in life keeps us going. That's why meaning in life measures are a strong prophylactic against suicide. And so this meaning in life really matters. And there's a pun in there, and I'm going to get to it. So what are the factors? Well, one is you want coherence. Your life can't be absurd, and that goes towards the predictive processing relevance realization. Things have to be fundamentally intelligible to you. Okay, if you're living in a world that's striking you as absurd, you're doomed. And then, of course, there's the one we love to trumpet, which is purpose and purpose-driven life and purpose. And don't you know it's about purpose? And purpose matters, but it's not the most important factor. Yes, you do need an overarching goal, but if you lack the other factors, purpose won't be enough for you. And we, of course, see this in the lives of people who have been tremendously successful. They still can experience profound meaninglessness. So what's important are two other factors, significance and mattering. Significance is how valuable things are your experiences. And that was very nebulous. I'll come back to it. And then what came out was this fourth factor, mattering, which seems to matter the most. And it converged with great philosophical arguments by Wolff on meaning in life and why it matters. Mattering is how much are you connected to things that have an existence and value independent of your egocentric existence and preferences. So you can ask yourself these three questions. What do I want to exist even if I don't? How real is it? And how much of a difference do I make to it now? If you ain't got good answers to that, you've got meaning in life. If you have a lot of answers to that, a lot of meaning in life, right? Now, notice I snuck one in there, and that's because the very recent work has shown that significance and mattering are actually two sides of the same thing. We need to be connected to what we deem to be really real. If the thing that's giving all of this to you is our characters in a video game, you ultimately are prone to substantial meaninglessness. You need to be connected to something real. So this mattering, this connectedness to other people, you can see how this is plugging in to what Gregg is talking about. Independent work, Kelly Allen, belonging. We need to belong. We need to have a sense of belonging. You don't have a sense of belonging, you're in trouble. Psychologically, socially, physiologically, you're in trouble. Belonging is fitting in, connecting, being recognized and appreciated by others. Here's the argument. I think meaning in life and belonging are just two different aspects of the same thing. It plugs into Gregg's work. And then here's how it plugs into mine work. That connectedness, that what I call religio, is exactly what predictive processing, recursive relevance realization gives you. It is that connectedness. Relevance is about how you are connected to things, how they matter to you, how they are important to you, how you are relevant to them. Because as Gregg argues, we are primate mammals. So for us, it's not only how things are relevant to us, it is how we can make ourselves relevant to others. And then we're back into the influence matrix. Do you see how this keeps going and going and going and wrapping? So we can plug all of this in, we can integrate and plug it into all the work. I think some of the best scientific work and philosophical work being done on meaning in life and belonging, and say, this is why meaning in life is so important. This is why belonging is so important. This is why if you take these away from human beings and give them all kinds of other things that ramp up their subjective well-being, they still might very well commit suicide. One other point here, which is this meaning in life, religio, is not reducible or replaceable by morality, contrary to what your culture is trying to tell you. All you need is subjective well-being and living a moral life according to whatever screwed up moral code we're trying to craft right now in a most chaotic fashion. It's not rationally, reflectively being driven. But even the central presupposition of that argument is not true. The degree to which your life is morally admirable and the degree to which it is meaningful, they're not independent, they're correlation, but they're far from parity. The classic example used in literature is loneliness. You can be a very moral, very lonely person, which means you're high in morality and very low in meaning in life. And that, right, is also an important thing that comes out of this, because, Gregg is integrating a justification system, which is ultimately what morality seems to be, with something deeper, which I think is this influence matrix and relationality that plugs into, I think, the more fundamental meaning in life. Lakatosh said you have a good research program when you can integrate a lot of things, have insightful connections, and make fruitful openings for specific empirical endeavors. All of this is happening in this integration that we're showing this to you. Everything I've been talking about here is an avenue for explicit and very specific empirical investigation.
Amen. That was beautifully said. I'll make a couple of comments. First off, in the interest of time, we're going to need to not going to be able to open up too much for discussion. But I want to say that on the UTOK circle, I'm happy to take any questions, and we'll create some maybe additional session, because I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of questions, but there is a 10 o'clock. And that's what I want to point to in terms of how do we reflect on our own selves, the UTIC fundamental identity shift in particular, and then what are the justifications we need at a social justice level? That's another one. So in relationship, there's actually the next symposia are going to be essentially extensions of this. I want to also play off of what John said and actually make a tree of knowledge move. You can think about complexification on the tree of knowledge as a dimension of mattering. Okay, mattering. Life, then living is a form of mattering, and minding is a form of living, and culturing. And what is your embedded structure? What's the agent arena real relation across the recursive stack? And as a social justifying primate, I will encourage you then to look out at your life in relationship to its mattering. What is the embedded recursive relevance realizing in the ecological, interpersonal, societal, future context? And when I feel connected, when I feel expanded and connected at my pre-level, pre-egoic level, into my egoic persona level, into the transcendent, I actually had experience of that run through, I say it goes through my cells. It's a wisdom energy. The God of source that is entropy and energy gets organized and oriented toward the transcendent as I connect. That, folks, to me, that is the influence matrix justification and the potentiality of orienting towards wisdom. If we can afford that, we are in much better shape than the broken meaning crisis, chaotic, fragmented pluralism. So this is fundamentally about creating particular kinds of recursive relevance realization stacks that afford affordances of particular kinds of anticipations that we can be guided toward or not. The question is whether we will be. I hope so. John, I'll give you sort of the last word here as we wrap up. And bring this session to a close. Thank you so much, my good friend. There are a lot of other questions I wanted to get to. I know this would go fast, but this has been beautiful.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. Gregg and I said, we did this kind of, we met, what are we going to talk about? And Gregg proposed the topic. And then we sort of, I think, I can't remember, it was me or him, said, should we plan about this? And then we both sort of laughed. We don't need to plan about this. We will just start running and it'll immediately catch fire. And that's exactly what happened. So the prediction came true. Our anticipation did zero in on what was relevant in the relevant way. I just want to step out of the particular topic and now talk about the relationship, which I think is to perform what we have been talking about. I've tried to show you from my end, and Gregg has done it from his end, how our two initially very independent projects converged very, very powerfully and continue to do so. As he unpacks what he's doing and I unpack what I'm doing, we keep reconnecting and the connection gets stronger and deeper. That has been a reliable thing. Now, of course, we're no longer independent. We do a lot of collaboration, but that initial convergence and then the fact that it was so pregnant with promise that has continually being fulfilled, that is a strong argument. That's a meta argument for plausibility. when you get two independent sources that converge and then have elegant transfer forward, that's good evidence that the constructs are not being driven by individual bias, right? Now, I'm not talking about certainty here. I'm not even talking about probability, because probability has to be empirically established. But the attempt, and I'm not going to make this whole argument, I've made it so many times, right? Before you can look for probability, you have to have plausibility in what hypotheses are you going to check, what confounds are you going to control for, what implications are you going to look at, what theoretical debates. Science, the empirical endeavor of science, presupposes, and other people have made this argument, plausibility. How do you judge plausibility? Plausibility is judged by trustworthiness. When two independent channels converge, that's why you trust when you can see and hear something over when you can just see it. It's a plausibility judgment that goes into your interpretation of realness. And you judge how plausible something is by how fruitful it is once the construct has come into existence, how powerful it is. Both of those have been demonstrated. So please hear me very carefully. I'm not making a claim for probability. I'll come to that in a sec. I'm making a claim for something that is also integral, that takes place at a theoretical level. This is a very plausible theoretical framework for that reason. It can guide specific empirical investigation. It is backed by constructs and arguments that have empirical legitimacy to them, and it shows tremendous promise. So this is a claim that we have not only are the arguments we're making, but the meta argument of our work coming together the way it has raises the plausibility of the integration of this framework. And that all plausibility means, all it means, but what it really importantly means is when you take something seriously within a scientific context. I think this should be taken seriously. I think it should be taken seriously. People should be wanting to engage theoretical debate, experimental competition, empirical endeavors. So I just wanted to say that. And then what has made that run is that Gregg is a lovely person. You know, entering into all of this can't be driven because I am not an abstract Platonic machine, even though I'm sometimes mistaken for one, even by myself. I am actually a primate mammal that is highly socialized and enculturated. Doing this theoretical collaboration requires somebody that you can love and trust, and that can share your enthusiasm and can probe you in the right ways when you're trying to put things together. You need a lovely person, and Gregg is that. And so I'm very grateful that he reached out to me. I'm very grateful to that. And he predicted, I think it was in the initial email, I think our work will really converge. And that's one of the
anticipation horizon.
Yeah, it was one of the best predictions I ever saw. And so I just wanted to, that'll be my final word on it. So both from the epistemic side, the relationship between Gregg and I, which gives us epistemic plausibility, and also the interpersonal relationality, and they need each other. I wanted to point to that. So I think this needs to be taken seriously. And my judgment is that Gregg is a fundamentally good person, and therefore he should be taken seriously. This conference, I think, is very good evidence to both of those things. And it has been my great pleasure to be here. Gregg and I, of course, will be doing work going forward. That's without question. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much, Sean. You know, as I've told you, you're an academic hero of mine and a dear friend and philosophical fellowship in the best and truest meaning. And so I'll just be filled in relationship to what you offered. So thank you. My primate heart is feeling filled. So I really do. I hope you guys, I'll leave you this one thought. Go out there and recursively realize in relation relevant structures and see you doing it at the various fractal levels and enter into relation and watch that process and track yourself in relationship to where you're headed at mutual relational value or the reverse. And I think that's I experience that as a beautiful guide. So I hope you found this useful. We will call it to a close. John, dear friend, thank you so much. It was wonderful. I appreciated all of the conversations with Alexander Bard and Bonnie. Look forward to picking up all this stuff and all the beautiful, inspiring work you're doing. We're all, I'm sure, big fans. So, all right, folks, we got to go so we can get to the next ones. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes. Lovely. Take care. Bye-bye.